Does the way that Ohio State's season ended, which is a national championship and double-digit wins in every playoff game, change the way you view Tennessee's 2024 season? It does me significantly. I came away from the Tennessee-Ohio State game thinking that, man, Tennessee is really, really short on talent. I don't believe that as much anymore. Now, I think that Ohio State was more talented, but I think they followed the Michigan model 2 years ago, and that is keep the players they've got. And listen, there's a big difference, guys. I'm telling you, I've seen freshmen go to sophomores and sophomores go to juniors, and they can look like different people, like altogether. So to have guys that are 22, 23 is a big difference over 19 and 20, which is what the past two national champions have had. So, Caleb, how much? I know it has to change it some, I would think. How much does it change that Ohio State game now in the rear view? And if you want to read about it, it's on offthehooksports.com. Go ahead.
I'll be honest with you, and you guys know I've been the most negative Nancy on covering Tennessee and calling the season a disappointment. It drastically changes my view. Ohio State didn't just maintain their talent. Dave, if you remember, they loaded up in the they spent $20 million in the transfer portal on having just more talent than everybody else. And let's reset for a minute. Okay, so Ohio State, up until the Michigan game this year, let's take the Michigan game out. What's their resume, Dave? It's a 1-point loss on the road to the number one team in the country, Oregon.
Yes.
There is absolutely no shame in that. They were clearly the best team until that Michigan game. That Michigan game was a fluke. It's obviously a fluke. It's a rivalry. I think it was Michigan's national championship, and Ohio State was thinking about other things at the time. So the mentality was totally different. Now let's get to what happened with Tennessee. Tennessee catches Ohio State at Ohio State's angriest. Now, I know we're going to talk in a minute about fans packing the horseshoe. It was still, by and large, a road game for Tennessee, just not as much of a road game as it could have been. There were still more Ohio State fans in the stadium than Tennessee fans. So it was still a road game for Tennessee overall. Now, Ohio State, when you look at what they did, when you look at how they beat Tennessee, and then how they beat Oregon, and then how they beat Texas, and then how they beat Notre Dame, and then you look at Tennessee's schedule and you say, you know what? This Tennessee football team went 10-2. They had an upset loss. Pretty much every team in the college football playoff had an upset loss, by the way. That in case we forgot, right? I mean, Georgia had an upset loss. I just mentioned Ohio State had an upset loss. Everybody but Oregon had a bad loss on their resume, and Tennessee was just one of them with Arkansas. Outside of that, the only thing that kept Tennessee from advancing was getting the worst draw in the first round of the college football playoff because of the quirky seeding. There's nothing to say that Tennessee couldn't have made it all the way to the national title game otherwise. And I also thought about this recently yesterday, Dave. Tennessee caught Ohio State at their angriest. Tennessee, all three of their losses, they caught teams at their most desperate.
Okay, go ahead. I'm interested.
They caught Georgia at their most desperate. Georgia was a win or go home situation, and Tennessee was playing at Georgia, and I think we both agree Georgia still has more talent than Tennessee overall. Put those things together, Tennessee was they really had no shot in that game. Arkansas, whatever you think of Arkansas, they shouldn't be good enough to beat Tennessee, and Tennessee should not have lost that game. However, at the same time, Arkansas was good enough to hang with elite teams, and they were at their most desperate in that moment because they wanted Sam Pittman to keep his job because the players do love Sam Pittman. So their three losses...
Which is always a red flag for a coach when the players just absolutely love you. Go ahead.
True.
Ashley says, bring back the old intro. Ashley, work with me because I got a new board, and the new intro hasn't even worked correctly yet. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the point I'm making is, when you factor those things in, when you factor in that Tennessee's quarterback was, okay, Nico was not as ready as we thought he'd be early, and the fact that Tennessee's a key part of their offense, Lance Hurd, was playing half the year on a sprained ankle, put all those things together, and the season doesn't look as bad. And then I step back and look at perspective for a minute. Josh Heupel takes over a program that was 3-7, that was down in the dumps, that was losing everybody to transfer portal, that was the most disastrous program in college football. and he goes 7-6, 11-2, 9-4, 10-3. And I'm like, okay, has my criticism, having covered Tennessee knee deep, knowing that they went all in on 2024, did I lose perspective covering this team to a certain degree? And I think I might have.
Interesting. All right, let's update the poll question, which is today's tough question, and it's brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com. Other attorneys say they'll go to trial. They won't. They'll settle and settle for less. So, Caleb, give us the poll question.
Does Ohio State's national title run make Tennessee's season look better?
All right, here we go. It's brought to you by Banks & Jones, banksandjones.com. Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. All right, so what do the voters say so far?
The voters so far are saying 88%. Yes, it makes Tennessee's season look better.
Wow. It makes it look a lot different. Steve says with another path that Tennessee would have gotten deeper. Go ahead and let's do this. Pull up the college football playoff bracket and let's run through it. And let's take a look at each team. The only way I can do it is say neutral site. But let's say neutral site, which I know is not where the first round is played. Would they have beaten those teams in our estimation? All right, so pull it up and let's run through them real quick. Let's not belabor this, but let's go ahead and get into it, and then give me your thoughts on the message board as well, because the AP poll is coming out today, and I think Tennessee is going to be top 15 with the way they lost. I don't think that they're going to be top 10, but I come away from the season thinking they're a top 10 team, but I know how AP voters are, which ain't grand. And they don't know what they're doing because this is the first year of a 12-team playoff, so it's all screwy. All right, but let's go through the bracket real quick. If Tennessee plays Team X, do they beat them on a neutral site?
All right, so if Tennessee plays Clemson, do they beat them on the neutral site? Yes.
Yes.
Is that a debate? Okay. No. So, by the way, I disagree with you. They're going to finish top 10 because I'm going to run down these teams.
I don't doubt that they should, but I don't trust the AP voters. So we're on the same page.
If Tennessee plays SMU, do they beat them?
Yes.
Yes. If Tennessee plays Indiana, do they beat them?
Yes.
And by the way, I want to point this out because, Dave, you know this as well as I do. One of the laziest things people do, and this is why the BCS was so stupid when they had it back in the day, margin of victory in terms of numbers, like, oh, Tennessee lost by 25 and Indiana only lost by 10. I'm like, you got to look at the flow of the game, right? A 10-point loss can look like a way bigger blowout sometimes than a 25-point loss.
If you watch that game last night, I mean, Notre Dame came out with all their best stuff on the first drive, take a 7-0 lead, and then Ohio State said, let's go ahead and put the foot to the hammer, and they're up 21-7 before you know it.
Yeah, and then it's 31-7 by the third quarter. Yeah, you're right. It's like it's. I agree. So I mean, and then Notre Dame fights back in the end, but Ohio State was clearly on a different class. So there's that. By the way, I want to point out making Tennessee look better. I didn't even mention the fact that Tennessee didn't have their best offensive weapon when they played Ohio State that day. That's just another way to say they looked even better. So, okay, now let's go here. It gets a little trickier here. Tennessee, Notre Dame, who they just played yesterday. Dave, talent-wise, I lean Tennessee. I think Notre Dame was a little more experienced. I think their chemistry. I think Tennessee is more likely to make a mistake to cost them that game. Is that fair?
Yes.
Tennessee, Penn State. I mean, James Franklin in big games.
I still like Tennessee, but not as much as I did considering what they did in the playoff. But
right.
Neutral side, I would take Tennessee.
All right, Tennessee, Texas.
I would take Texas.
I'd probably take Texas too. Now, what about teams that got buys? Hold on. Okay. Tennessee, Arizona State. Tennessee.
Tennessee, yeah, definitely.
All right. Now let's keep going. Tennessee, Boise State.
I like Tennessee.
Yeah. Tennessee, Georgia, Tennessee, Oregon. They probably lose those two, which is
Yes.
fine. Now, let's think about this. Let's consider the fact that if they did the seeding the way they should have done it, Dave, and not with these, the top 4 conference champions get the auto bids and, all of that stupid stuff they did. Okay, let's think about this for a minute. Tennessee was number 7 in the college football playoff ranking. If Tennessee had been seeded properly and not this stupid gimmick they did, they would have played SMU in the first round. What do you think they would have done to SMU? At home, they would have played SMU at home.
SMU.
Yeah, they'd have hammered SMU. Now, where things are a little tricky, they probably get bounced out in the second round because then they would have played Georgia in the second round. However, they would have played Georgia without Carson Beck. And Gunnar Stockton probably wasn't ready for the moment.
Fair.
So if they get to the second round, they're playing Georgia. That is a very winnable game. Let's say, hypothetically, they beat Georgia in the second round. Get to the third round, they're probably playing Texas. Again, okay, but at that point, they're in the semifinals losing to Texas. I'm just saying the path is much better if the seeding is the way it should have been. And here's another point, and I want to point this out. And I know I'm throwing a lot of things out, but I don't know if you know this, Dave, but Penn State lost to Minnesota. They beat Minnesota by 1 point earlier this year. It was one of the luckiest wins they had. There was a fluke late drive that cost them. If Penn State loses that game, Tennessee gets the 8th seed, and they're playing 9th seeded Indiana in the first round at home of the playoff.
Okay, interesting. Then things look a lot different.
A heck of a lot different. This all has to do with the quirky way the college football playoff was seeded. That's what this all came down to when you look at it. When you consider the fact that Tennessee had to play the national championship team, the most talented team in the first round, and then they played them on the road, and then they lost their best player on the opening drive of the game, they do look, I have to defend them a little bit. They look a heck of a lot better.